Brazil and Argentina, we share common values, we have common origins, and also we have a very specific situation because we live under a same economic bloc. But we are separated, let's say, by two common English words we love, which is foot and ball. Yeah, football is our passion and also a reason for rivalry. I promised myself I would not talk about soccer, but about football, it's not impossible to put so many Argentinians here in the same room and not to talk about it. So briefly, I would like to congratulate you guys for the achievement you did last Saturday here in Brazil. I couldn't say I was happy with that, but I understand. Yeah, and I know that perhaps Messi has a great friend, which is Neymar, and Lionel Messi are great friends, right? So they certainly knew about our event today, and perhaps what they do was that treat Argentinians nicely, and he took it perhaps too serious, yeah. But you at least responded this kindness, and you were very gentle. Yeah, I think you can compare with what the Germans did the last time they were here. Yeah, we can, I think, say thank you. But anyway, it's not about soccer today. It's about a common passion we share. I think we seem to share is taxes, right? Because I think we love them because we have been raising them consistently the last years, right? Brazil and Argentina are two economic giants, but have been suffering, unfortunately, in the last years with some populist and unorthodox measures, which impacted our economy and, of course, our tax systems. So I think we have to discuss a lot about taxes because that is certainly the way we're going to get out of this, let's say, not comfortable situation we are today and resume our past of success and of stability. So I think we can discuss a lot of issues today, but I think exchanging these experiences is the most valuable thing we can do this night. Yeah, I'll just say and finish my initial speaking here, saying that perhaps what the Argentinian audience doesn't know is that Brazil is currently going into a tax reform. I apologize, we entered a bit late because I was just there in a meeting with Brazilian tax authorities discussing our reform. And I don't know if Brazilian guys know, but Argentina did a tax reform in 2017. And the bill they proposed was basically to tax dividends, which weren't taxed, from what I understood from my Argentinian friends, and reduce the corporate tax rate on the companies. So what happened? They managed to introduce taxation on dividends, but from what I understand, have not yet reduced the corporate tax rate to the level they imagined to keep a neutrality. So what you guys probably don't know, the Argentinian audience, is that Brazilians are discussing to do exactly the same thing. So I think tonight we can discuss this topic and a lot of other topics because perhaps we're doing the same things or thinking about similar solutions, but in one of them we must be ahead of you, and in the other, the situation would be exactly the reverse. So I would like just to introduce my friend here, Martín Caranta, who is also the co-chair of this event, and briefly introduce the Brazilian speakers today that are Eduardo Muniz and Ariane Reis. So Eduardo Muniz is the co-chair of YIN Brazil. He is a great friend and he's doing his LL.M right now in the prestigious University of São Paulo, and he's partner of Brigagão Duque Estrada Advogados in Rio de Janeiro. And Ariane Reis is a tax specialist. She has an LL.M on tax law in the university, the famous University of Lausanne in Switzerland. And Eduardo is going to talk about tax on consumption, consumption taxes, and Ariane is going to talk about post-pandemic measures, and exactly the same, the issue here I talked to you just a few seconds before. So, guys, I think we have a great night of discussions today. I'd like to thank you all, and mainly the audience that is in YouTube watching us. Martin, please go ahead. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, João, for the presentation. Thanks all the Brazilian guys for coming here. It's a pleasure for us to be here with you and to share this event tonight. I will, Valeria and Florencia, speak a few minutes for us to present the Argentinian team, and then I will continue. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Martin, and many thanks, João, for the introduction. On behalf of the YIN committee in Argentina, we want to thank especially the Brazilian team for being so proactive and for this initiative. We have a brilliant panel today, and as you said, João, with very interesting and current topics, because we've gone through this and we are still experiencing or suffering this reform. So this will be a very rich panel. And well, we are not only separate, but also united. Some of us have both nationalities. So we're also, well, neutral in a way. So many thanks, and well, enjoy the conference, and thank you again. Flor?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good evening. It is also a great pleasure for me to be in this event. As Valeria already said, I would like to thank again our Brazilian colleagues for inviting us to join this event, and most of all for the excellent organization they have in this event. Also, Tiago, that is there in the shadows of this event. As you already say, João, there are many similarities between the situation in both Argentina and Brazil. And I think this is the main reason why I think this event is going to be a success, and everyone is going to enjoy it a lot. Regarding the corporate tax rate cut you mentioned, I will share to our Brazilian audience the end of this sad story, because we managed to tax dividends, but last month there was a bill enacted that reestablished the corporate tax rate to 35%, that it was the rate that corporations were taxed prior to the reform of 2017. So the end of the story is we only managed to add a new tax on dividends. I will let you now with Martin. Martin, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Well, I will present our people in a few minutes. Well, this is Luca Rebecchi. He's a lawyer. He's graduated from the University of Buenos Aires. He's tax specialist from the procurement of National Treasury. He has a specialization in tax law and at the Inter-American Center of Tax Administrations, el Centro Interamericano de Administraciones Tributarias, también conocido como CIAT. He worked 14 years in the National Tax Court. He has a lot of experience from there, and now he works on the other side of the desk. He works as a tax analyst in the Federal Bureau of Public Revenue. It is our Administración Federal de Ingresos Públicos, also known as AFIP. He will be talking about consumption taxes with Eduardo in a few minutes. Here we have Esteban Aguirre Sarabia. He is an attorney, graduated from the Catholic University of Argentina with honors. He has a specialization in tax law at Austral University, a master in international tax at the University of Florida. He also has a specialization in customs law at the Torquato Di Tella University. He's an active member of the Tax Commission of the Public Bar Association of the City of Buenos Aires, and he's also an active member of the Argentina Association of Fiscal Studies, la Asociación Argentina de Estudios Fiscales, which is the branch of IFA in Argentina. He's a fellow under the Latin American Scholarship Program in 2009, organized by the United States Department of the States of the U.S. Embassy in Buenos Aires, and the Stage International 2012 program organized by the Bureau de Abogados de Paris. Here we're talking about the second topic, which is the post-pandemic and Brazilian and Argentinian tax treaty. And this is me. I'm an accountant graduating from the University of Buenos Aires, School of Economics, and I work as a tax advisor. I am partner of Lisicki Litvin, which is a national firm of accountants and lawyers. I am an active member of the Asociación Argentina of Estudios Fiscales. I'm full member of the Society of Trust and State Practitioners, also member of IFA. I am invited professor of postgraduate and graduate courses in taxation at different public and private universities, and lecturer on tax matters in public and private institutions. That's the presentation. As João said a few minutes before, we have in common passion for football, passion for taxation and fiscal studies, and also we have in common some movements in the field of taxation. Our tax system is not easy. I would like to share with you a few comments of the last developments in tax matters in Argentina. As you can see in the screen, in the last 5 years, there have been important amendments in the legislation. In the year 2016, we have the law 27,260, which introduced the voluntary disclosure initiative and also tax payment facilities with redemptions of interest and penalties. It was a change in the income tax law. The exchange rate was set out of the tax basis, which is important because inflation is contained in exchange rate, so it was part of taxing a real tax basis. There was also an amendment in the wealth tax. It was a reduction in the tax rate from 1.25% in the year 2016 to a progressive reduction in the year 2017, 0.75%, and then till the year 2018, where the tax rate was 0.25%. The following year had an intensive tax reform, the reform that was commented by Flor and João a few minutes before. It introduces changes in all the taxes that are part of our tax system, but principally the corporate income tax law had a reduction in the tax rate from 35% to 30% the first 2 years, and then it was in the program a reduced rate of 25%. It introduced important amendments in the capitalization, thin capitalization rule. Also, it was admitted for the purposes of income tax, the adjustment for inflation with certain conditions. As you know, our country suffers from inflation. It was in the year 2018, the inflation was about 48%, 55% in 2019, and 36% last year. Also, it admitted actualization of the amortization basis, and in that law introduces a cellular tax on dividends, the rate of 7% the first 2 years, and then it was part of the program to increment that rate to 13%. There was another cellular tax on capital gains on public bonds, actions, and other financial assets, and also the capital gains from immovable property were taxed with this law. The following year, we have another amendment. In this case, it was amendment, the adjustment for inflation for income tax purposes, with some restrictions. The effect should be deducted in 3 years, and it was replaced the index for the inflation measurement. In 2019, there was a law that introduced tax payment facilities and redemptions, also interest and penalties. There was new conditions for adjustment for inflation for income tax purposes. The effect was to be computed in 6 years with no adjustment of the basis. So it was also impacted with inflation. And there was a huge reform in the wealth tax. The tax rate was increased for the assets situated abroad up to 2.25%. This year, we have another amendment in the corporate income tax law, law number 27,630, introduced progressive tax rates, and this topic is going to be commented by Esteban in a few minutes. So, as you can see, the tax system in our country is not easy, and also it isn't steady. There is a lot of movement that you can see. Well, this is a few presentation, and now I will let Eduardo and Lucas comment you the first topic, and we have a very interesting material that they will share with you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Martin, very much for your presentation. I believe Lucas will now present the slides for our first topic today. It was nice to see that in Argentina, the current reforms are clearly focused on income tax. So the concerns are not directed to consumption taxes, but as you'll see here in Brazil, the reform of the consumption tax system is still a major issue. And I will briefly first introduce you to our system and also our federation, which is kind of unique in the world. And in the end, and after that, Lucas will also present the consumption taxes in Argentina and an overview. And in the end, we'll discuss the current proposals in both countries and also the similarities and divergences between both systems. But in what comes to our country, the taxation of consumption in Brazil, first, it's important to have in mind that Brazil is really a huge country. It's the 6th largest population. And our federation is really unique because in most countries, the federations has 2 levels. And here we have 3 levels, which is the federal union, which is our central government. We have 27 states, which is a huge number of states. But the main issue is the municipalities, which we have more than 5,000 municipalities in Brazil. And all of these municipalities, they are considered to be a federative entity with its own tax autonomy. Lucas, you can pass. In what comes to general information regarding our tax system, our GDP ratio in comparison to the total tax burden is 31%. It's really high in comparison to the Latin America average, which is 33%. And in Brazil, we really have a huge inequality in terms of economy. So there are many families living in poverty, and due to the exemption that apply to low income families living in poverty, normally they don't pay income tax. So if you have to pay, if you have to tax, then you do this by taxing the consumption base. And today the consumption base is really taxed in Brazil. It stands for 42% of our total tax burden, almost twice of the burden that applies to income tax. So the first conclusion that we can reach here is that taxing consumption is really important as a matter of source of revenue for Brazil. Lucas, can you? Great, thank you. This tradition of taxing consumption base is not new. In the 60s, there are registries of that by the time the consumption taxes exceeded income taxation, and in the 60s, it was carried out the first and real tax reform that we have in Brazil. And through such reform, the consumption base was divided by the 3 levels of our federation. So the federal union has authority to tax manufacturing of goods, and from 1880 onwards, it's also started to somehow tax consumption through social contributions on gross revenues, which is now a really important source of revenue for the central government. The states, they are entitled to tax goods, and from 88 onwards, also telecommunication and transportation services. And the municipalities, they are entitled to tax services, which is almost a gross revenue tax because it has no credit. So this is how we tax. And if the state is entitled to tax a transaction, the municipalities shall not tax, and the opposite is also true. So state taxes and municipal tax should not conflict with each other. Only one can apply. The current constitution has mainly preserved such structure, so we still have a threefold consumption taxation in Brazil. Lucas, can you? Thank you. And in what comes, so due to such division on the taxation of consumption, we don't have a regular taxation that applies both to products and service. So you have to look into the taxation that applies to products, and afterwards the one that applies to service, and they can be quite different because in what comes to products, be it manufacture or just the resale of items in Brazil, they will generally be taxed by the tax on manufacturing of goods, the state tax, our state VAT, and also by the social contribution on gross revenues. And the average tax burden due to our gross up methods, they are really complex. They may reach 50 or up to 60% of the product price. So it's really a high taxation that apply to products. In theory, you would have reductions or exemptions to essential products and service, but the reality is that basic supplies such as electric energy, telecom, they are heavily taxed by the states because this is an important source of revenue. They find out that, and they really tax this base. In what comes to imports and exports, in imports, we have almost the same taxes added off the custom duty that we will add to such taxation, so the burden can be a little bit higher. And in exports, generally such taxation will not apply due to the adoption of the destination principle, but this destination principle has some problems I will not address here, but it's not fully applied. So somehow there's a little bit of taxation also on exports. In what comes to service, the average tax burden can be really different because we'll have also the social contributions on gross revenues. But the main taxation at local level would be the tax on services, and the rate is limited to 5%. So the average tax burden, only of course considering indirect taxation, would be from 9 to 50, 60%. So the difference is really amazing. Imports of services, they are much more taxed due to withholding taxes and also other regulatory charges that apply to the importation of services. Generally, I'm talking here about B2B services. In what comes to B2C services, this is to say the consumer importing services, which is quite regular during in the digital economy times. It's really hard to tax the individual, the consumer. So what Brazil does nowadays is to impose a financial tax on the credit cards transactions at the 6.34%, and this is seen as a measure of protecting our local tax bases, also on consumer importation. Thank you, Lucas. So this is just no. Thank you, Lucas. You can this one. So in what comes to our consumption taxation, we have one nation but several consumption taxes. The definition of the applicable tax burden can be really complex because at the end of the day, you will have to first determine whether you are acquiring a service or a product. And the difference between a service and a product in the context of the digital economy can be really tricky. As you can see, most of the past supplies, such as CDs of music and something like this, nowadays they are consumed through streaming services, download, and other similar forms. So it's not easy to the difference between services and goods, and this is really a problem, and this really create troubles for taxation and determining the applicable tax burden in Brazil. Another problem is that our consumption base is really overtaxed, especially in what concerns energy and telecommunication services, which are services consumed also by the families that live in poverty. So at the end of the day, you are also establishing a little bit of regressivity in our tax system. And another important issue is that the system is really not that neutral from an economy perspective, both because our local VATs, they have several restrictions on credits that can be registered by the provider, or because due to such separation of taxation of service in comparison to products, you can have both two players that compete in the same market, and in the end of the day, their tax burden is really different. Here, the example I'm mentioning is the streaming services. They're taxed nowadays by the tax on service at a rate of 5%. And cable TV, by its turn, is generally considered to be a telecommunications service and is taxed by a rate that can be reached 20%. And also still talking about the problems, sometimes you have such huge average tax burden and such huge taxes established by the legislation, but due to tax benefits, the tax base can be eroded. So we sometimes talk about Swiss cheese taxes, because you have a huge base, but there are several tax benefits and other special tax regimes that erodes at base. And another problem in Brazil is that the industrial activity is really overtaxed, while other segments of the economy, such as the rental of movable property, which is very important in the context of the sharing economy, is not subject to ISS or state tax today. So these were some of the main problems. The good thing is that our taxes are really old. So mainly most of the problems have been tested and put on and being examined by the Supreme Court of Brazil. So we had massive controversy in the past. They are now settled, but the first conclusion for now is that our system is clearly not ready for the post-industrial society, for the gig economy, platforms, artificial intelligence, and this difference between services and goods really cannot accommodate such post-industrial society and the new consumption habits.
Sorry. Yes. That's okay. Hello, everyone. I want to talk in Spanish. Básicamente, Argentina tiene un sistema muy parecido al de Brasil. Voy a hablar bien despacito, como pidió João, para que entiendan bien. Tiene un sistema en parte parecido al brasileño y en parte diferente. La primera diferencia, y esto hablábamos con Eduardo, es que nuestra Constitución Nacional, si bien establece que pueden fijar estos impuestos al consumo o impuestos indirectos, como les decimos nosotros, los puede fijar tanto la nación, o sea, federal taxes, y las provincias, state taxes, las municipalidades, esa es la diferencia que tenemos con Brasil, no podrían en principio, después voy a entrar un poquito más en ese detalle de por qué no podrían, fijar impuestos al consumo similares a los nacionales. En principio, al igual que Brasil, nosotros tenemos un impuesto federal por excelencia, que es el impuesto al valor agregado, o VAT, que grava todas las ventas, locaciones, importaciones definitivas, y en eso, igual que Brasil, nosotros adoptamos el criterio país de destino, con lo cual las importaciones van a estar gravadas, pero las exportaciones no van a estar gravadas. También van a estar gravadas las prestaciones que son aprovechadas en el país. Esto generó, sin extenderme mucho, pero había generado cierta controversia en algunos casos, en la experiencia que uno tiene en la Task Force de Argentina, sobre a qué se refería con prestaciones realizadas en el exterior y aprovechadas en Argentina. Un caso había sido nuestra aerolínea de bandera, que era Aerolíneas Argentinas, que usaba un sistema como todas las aerolíneas, que era Amadeus, y ahí se había generado una controversia respecto de si estaba aprovechado o no en el país. Finalmente, la disputa fue favorable a la aerolínea en 2 instancias, pero quedan grabadas las prestaciones realizadas en el exterior, pero que se aprovechen acá. Es un tema que genera mucha controversia, no quiero extenderme mucho sobre este punto, pero sí es difícil ver qué se entiende por utilizado en el país. Hay algún dictamen de la Administración Tributaria Argentina al respecto, pero trae conflictos. Y finalmente, los servicios digitales. Argentina, después lo vamos a ver en la conclusión, al igual que Brasil, no tienen un Digital Tax Service, sino que Argentina lo tiene incluido en el IVA. Y todas las plataformas digitales digamos, que no sean residentes, pero la explotación efectiva de ellas se haga en el país, van a estar grabadas por el impuesto al valor agregado. Con lo cual, las grandes plataformas Netflix, Spotify, Booking, o si a alguno le gusta más Tinder, todas están grabadas en el IVA. Y un tema hoy de moda, los criptoactivos no están grabados en la ley de impuesto al valor agregado. Si alguna municipalidad rápida de reflejos empezó una provincia, perdón, no una municipalidad, empezó rápida de reflejos a poner el ojo ahí y a verlo. En principio, en el IVA hay una alícuota general del 21%, una alícuota reducida del 10,5%. Esta alícuota reducida generalmente son lo que tiene que ver con hay intereses de préstamos, con lo que es carne de todo tipo, algún producto fertilizante, miel, generalmente productos primarios, esos están grabados al 10,5%, y una alícuota incrementada en un caso que es el caso de telecomunicaciones o prestaciones de servicios públicos que se hagan a responsables inscriptos o monotributistas. Esto es básicamente el impuesto federal por excelencia. Después tenemos un par de impuestos más. Sinceramente, los impuestos al consumo son bastante bastante grandes. Uno trató de hacer una síntesis con el tiempo que tenía. Hay un poco más, pero básicamente nosotros tenemos los impuestos internos. Estos impuestos internos son incluso anteriores a la formación como nación de Argentina. Estos impuestos internos estaban incluso antes del IVA, y después se incorporó el IVA. En su momento estos impuestos los tenían las provincias, pero después quedaron a nivel nacional, y a diferencia del IVA, que grava todas las etapas, tanto la producción, comercialización como venta, este impuesto interno grava solo una etapa, que es la de venta. Con lo cual, básicamente, si una empresa brasileña viene a instalarse en la Argentina, sabe primero que tiene que pagar el IVA, y después va a tener que pagar, si fabrica ciertos productos, estos impuestos internos, similar a lo que dijo Eduardo, con lo que ellos tienen en el IVA, grava muchísimos productos, de entre ellos el que tiene alícuota más alta, que es el tabaco, pero después grava las bebidas azucaradas, las cervezas, los whisky, los autos, bueno, un montón de artículos. Yo señalo ahí porque el tabaco tiene una alícuota del 70% para ahí. A raíz de lo que bien señalaba Martín de la ley 27430, en ese momento se quiso imponer una alícuota más agresiva o más alta a bebidas azucaradas y cervezas. Finalmente, después de una negociación, de un tire y afloje en el Congreso, eso no prosperó, y hoy quedan grabadas a la misma tasa. Algo que nos gusta mucho a los argentinos, por lo menos a mí, el Fernet también está grabado en Argentina por impuestos internos. Después, finalmente, impuesto a los combustibles líquidos, al dióxido de carbono, lo que comúnmente se llama carbon tax. Nosotros celebramos el Acuerdo de París, del cual formamos parte, y nosotros siempre exponemos este impuesto a este carbon tax como, digamos, nuestra medida para tratar de contaminar menos. Bueno, ese impuesto a los combustibles líquidos y al dióxido de carbono también grava solo la etapa de venta, y lo grava tanto a los fabricantes como a los importadores, por lo cual si una empresa se instala acá, una empresa brasileña se instala acá y vende combustibles, como en su momento habíamos tenido a Petrobras, bueno, sabe también que tiene que pagar, además del IVA, va a tener que pagar este impuesto a los combustibles. Después, básicamente tenemos un impuesto a las apuestas online. Esto grava a todas las aplicaciones como Bet, y muchos más de juegos de azar. Bueno, ahí, ojo, porque lo que tenemos que tener en cuenta es que tiene una alícuota general, pero hay una alícuota, esto es algo que se ve mucho en las nuevas normas que se dictaron en Argentina, las que bien mencionó Martín, la idea de fomentar la inversión genuina. Hay una alícuota general para apuestas online de 5%, 2,5% si esa, digamos, si la empresa que presta esa plataforma para apuestas tiene inversiones genuinas en la Argentina, va a pagar una tasa reducida del 2,5%, y finalmente, y esto que hoy con el acuerdo del Pilar 1, Pilar 2 está tan de moda, si esta empresa está radicada en un paraíso fiscal, va a tener una tasa del 15%. O sea, una tasa altísima si está radicada en un paraíso fiscal. Me había olvidado de mencionar que en el impuesto a los combustibles es un impuesto que se cobra sobre, es un monto fijo por litro de pesos, nuestra moneda argentina, por litro. Y finalmente, como el último nacional, esta es nuestra vedette nueva, el impuesto país, que el impuesto país grava un montón de cosas, pero en lo que nos interesa de impuesto al consumo, grava todos los servicios digitales, Netflix, Spotify, y también Booking, nuevamente Tinder, o cualquier otra aplicación, lo grava. La alícuota general es más alta, pero puntualmente es un 30%, pero puntualmente para los servicios digitales está grabada en un 8%. O sea, pasando en limpio y a nivel nacional, y hablando de algo que señalaba Eduardo, de cómo estamos preparados para los gigantes digitales, en Argentina estamos grabando casi con un 29% a los servicios digitales si sumamos el IVA y el impuesto país. Y ahora viene nuestro, esto es algo que por ahí los argentinos, los asistentes argentinos por ahí lo van a entender un poquito mejor. Es difícil explicarlo, este impuesto a nivel global, porque es muy raro que exista un impuesto así a nivel global, pero es el impuesto a los ingresos brutos. Este es nuestro impuesto principal, es su impuesto principal a nivel estatal, digamos, provincial, perdón. A nivel, todas las provincias tienen este impuesto a los ingresos brutos, con lo cual una empresa ya brasileña que se radique en cualquier, primero como dato para abonar a lo que dice Eduardo también, Argentina no tiene tantos ciudadanos como Brasil. La verdad que sorprende la cantidad de ciudadanos de Brasil. Nosotros tenemos solo 45 millones, tenemos 23 provincias más la ciudad de Buenos Aires, que la ciudad de Buenos Aires es una locura hermosa que por ahí no la podemos explicar qué estatus tiene, pero digamos, a veces es una provincia más, a veces no, pero son 23 provincias más la ciudad autónoma de Buenos Aires. Todas esas tienen este impuesto a los ingresos brutos, que también, al igual que el IVA, grava todas las etapas, pero a diferencia del IVA, tiene un efecto, lo que se llama cascada o piramidal, en donde no se tiene en cuenta el impuesto pagado en la etapa anterior. ¿Qué quiere decir? Que esto estamos pagando impuestos sobre impuestos sobre impuestos. ¿Qué grava? Prácticamente todo, porque grava el ejercicio a título oneroso de cualquier actividad que se preste en forma habitual. Sinceramente, y porque parece que estoy en contra del impuesto a los ingresos brutos, pero si hay algún colega de las provincias me va a decir por qué te tirás contra los ingresos brutos, la realidad es que es algo que es lo poco que le ha quedado por gravar a las provincias, y acá vuelvo a retomar el tema. Si bien nación y provincia pueden fijar impuestos indirectos o al consumo, nosotros tenemos algo que se llama ley de coparticipación, porque a diferencia, y esto lo hablaba con Eduardo la otra vez que estábamos coordinando, a diferencia del sistema brasileño, que es el que a mí me gusta, que es parecido también al de Estados Unidos, que es el que a mí me gusta, donde todos pueden grabar todo, y donde podría haber varios estadios para grabar, bueno, nosotros, si bien partimos de lo mismo, salvo las municipalidades, la realidad, porque tanto Nación como las provincias pueden fijar impuestos indirectos, nosotros dictamos algo que se llama ley de coparticipación, en donde sintéticamente la Nación recauda los impuestos mencionados en esa ley, entre los cuales está el IVA, impuestos internos, y algunos de los que les dije, y le deja a las provincias todos los que no son similares al IVA, salvo este ingreso bruto, porque yo les estoy explicando y me dicen, pero Lucas, esto es igual al IVA. Sí, bueno, esto quedó fuera de la ley de coparticipación, fuera de esa prohibición, y hoy pueden gravar las provincias esto. Ahí hay algo que hoy también discutíamos con Martín a la mañana, es la alícuota. La alícuota en promedio es del 2,83. Cuando hablo en promedio, hablo de en general todas las actividades. Pero para ser justos, ahí yo les agregué, porque por ahí a nuestros colegas brasileños les va a interesar esto, todo lo que tiene que ver con la industria manufacturera. Manufacturera tiene una tasa de 1,3, está abajo del promedio, pero comercio mayorista o minorista, todo lo empresarial, está grabado a un 4%. Con lo cual, en general, si una empresa brasileña viene, va a tener una alícuota del 4% promedio, porque hay provincias que tienen más y hay alguna que tiene menos. Y se dedica a la actividad del agro, va a tener un 1%. Respecto a los servicios digitales, la mayoría también está grabado, con lo cual a los 29 que yo les fijé para servicios digitales a nivel nacional, hay que agregarle lo que se graba en materia de impuesto a los ingresos brutos de cada provincia, y a eso le vamos a sumar Córdoba, que es esta provincia que yo les dije que picó en punta, y es la única de las 23, incluso antes que se pusiera el IVA, que graba las criptomonedas, graba todas las operaciones con las criptomonedas. Y otra cuestión, con alguna, después le voy a hacer una lista bien de todas las provincias para hacer el paralelismo con Eduardo, que había hecho un mapa hermoso de los distintos estados brasileños. Después vamos a ver las provincias. Algunas graban la exportación en franca violación con lo que les dije de que adoptamos el criterio país de destino. Y por último, y para no robarle más tiempo tampoco a Eduardo, tenemos a nivel municipal, si bien no tenemos impuestos al consumo a nivel municipal, lo que tenemos es una tasa de seguridad e higiene que en algunos lugares se parece bastante a un impuesto al consumo. ¿Y por qué les digo? Porque si yo les digo tasa, ustedes me van a decir acá, en Italia, en España y en cualquier lado del mundo, y en Brasil por supuesto, me van a decir es una tasa que retribuye un servicio. Bueno, ¿qué pasa? Hay algunas provincias en donde algunas municipalidades, que esta cuestión está un poco desdibujada y las tasas de seguridad e higiene municipal terminan siendo calculadas sobre los ingresos brutos. Entonces, para cerrar esta cuestión y dejarlos con algo de problemática que vamos a ver después, terminamos teniendo en los tres lugares la posibilidad de que una empresa que se instale en alguna municipalidad, además de pagar todos estos impuestos que yo les mencioné, termine pagando alguna tasa de seguridad e higiene que termine recayendo sobre los ingresos brutos. Y para redondear, ahí les doy para que vean la impresión, esto es datos del Ministerio de Economía, muy similar la tasa a la de Brasil, 41% representan los impuestos al consumo, frente a un 21% de los impuestos a lo que sería el income tax. Gran parte de aportes y contribuciones en la seguridad social se lleva el segundo puesto, y en función de los impuestos provinciales, fíjense el colorcito rosa, el 77, e incluso en la última estadística, a nivel, estos datos tomados de AFIP, pero en la última estadística a nivel provincial, llega hasta el 80% de los ingresos de las provincias provienen de este impuesto a los ingresos brutos. Con lo cual, para las provincias es gran parte de sus ingresos, de sus ingresos para solventar. Y ahí, para terminar la parte mía, después vamos a seguir con Eduardo, el promedio a nivel OCDE de los impuestos al consumo. Nosotros estamos un poco por arriba, está en 30 y pico %, con lo cual estamos muy parecidos. Brasil, en eso estamos hermanados, también estamos muy parecidos, pero en un promedio más grande de la OCDE. Y finalmente, acá vamos con los problemas. ¿Por qué? Por esto que yo les explicaba de qué pasa. Tenemos que reducir los efectos nocivos de los ingresos brutos. Acá, fíjense que hay básicamente 4 medidas que se trataron de implementar. Una en 1994, 1994, Pacto Fiscal 2. Un pacto fiscal es un pacto que se celebró entre la nación y las provincias, y ahí se juntaron la nación y las provincias y dijeron: en 3 años tenemos que derogar ingresos brutos. Pasaron los años y nunca se derogó. Hoy ingresos brutos, lo estoy señalando, el ingreso bruto está más vigente que nunca, con lo cual esto no lo cumplimos. Después, en el mismo momento en que se está discutiendo esto que señaló Martín, de la 27430, la última reforma durante el gobierno anterior, se firmó algo que se llamó consenso fiscal, que también era un acuerdo entre la nación y las provincias, y se comprometían, entre otras cosas, a no gravar exportaciones, a limitar las alícuotas al 5% para 2018 e ir bajándolas progresivamente de 2019 hasta 2022. Y después un problema que hubo bastante, que era bastante complejo, que es que se graba, si una empresa, por ejemplo, una empresa brasileña, estaba radicada en Santa Fe, pero tenía actividades en otra provincia, que es la provincia de Córdoba, al estar radicada en Santa Fe, le cobraban una tasa de ingresos brutos mayor porque estaba ubicada fuera de esa provincia. Esto generó una discusión, e igual que señalaba Eduardo también, hubo una solución de la Corte Suprema que dijo: esto no va, no corresponde, y de esa manera el consenso fiscal se basó en tratar de bajar las alícuotas de ingresos brutos y arreglar este problema. Hasta 2017 veníamos genial. ¿Qué pasó? Ahí les digo, este consenso fiscal de 2017 se pasó 2018, 2019 y 2020. En 2018, 2019 y 2020 se suspendió la baja de alícuotas. El consenso fiscal 2020 se acaba de promulgar la semana pasada y también prorroga la suspensión de las alícuotas. Pasándolo en limpio, no se bajaron las alícuotas, se respetó lo de 2018 en general. Ahora les voy a mostrar un cuadro de cómo se respetó en general lo del 5%, pero la baja se suspendió y no pasó. Otras medidas que se tomaron en el año 2002, se rebajó el IVA, se redujo el IVA del 21 al 19%. Para nosotros fue un año muy complicado. Habíamos venido de 4 presidentes en una semana, pero bueno, en ese momento estaba bastante mal el país, y bueno, se redujo el IVA del 21 al 19% por 60 días. Eso duró lo que duró, no se prorrogó, hoy sigue en 21%. Durante el gobierno anterior, ya estoy terminando y no me paso del tiempo, durante el gobierno anterior se decretó durante un periodo muy chiquito de tiempo una tasa cero a los productos básicos, a productos de la canasta básica. Esto duró poco porque también nuestra Corte Suprema entendió que esto era inconstitucional porque violaba esta ley de coparticipación, esta norma que nos rige y decía, bueno, le está sacando recaudación vía impuesto, vía coparticipación, le está sacando impuestos a las provincias y lo dejó sin efecto. Y para terminar, dentro de las mejoras, una que está actualmente vigente y otra que tuvo una vigencia hasta el 2016. 2003 a 2016 se redujo el IVA a las compras efectuadas con tarjeta de débito hasta 1.000 pesos. Eso duró en cualquier, eran compras de combustible, comestible, todo lo que se usara la tarjeta de débito para fomentar digamos, el uso de medios electrónicos y reducir la informalidad, que en Argentina es altísima, está arriba del 40%, con esto se intentaba reducir. Y ahora, actualmente vigente, esto es algo que nos consta porque de la administración se estuvo trabajando y fue bastante, se puso bastante énfasis. Hoy, para los sectores vulnerados, se reduce en un 15% los consumos en tarjeta de crédito. Y por último, ahí les digo, fíjense esta tabla del cumplimiento de este consenso fiscal que yo les estaba diciendo. En general, saquen las 3 primeras columnas, dejen la última columna, que es lo de la reducción de alícuotas. Lo que es amarillo no cumplen, pero ahí. Y el rojo no cumple, con lo cual la mayoría de las provincias no está cumpliendo, salvo Buenos Aires y la ciudad de Buenos Aires. Ahí tienen todas nuestras provincias argentinas, todas nuestras provincias, y solo Santiago del Estero, Corrientes, la ciudad de Buenos Aires y la provincia de Buenos Aires, porque generalmente ustedes asociarán Buenos Aires con la ciudad, pero hay la ciudad de Buenos Aires y la provincia de Buenos Aires, que son los que cumplen. Con lo cual, estamos, y en esto comparto la conclusión de Eduardo, estamos en problemas en materia de impuestos al consumo porque la tasa es muy alta y este impuesto a los ingresos brutos es bastante perjudicial y es algo que si alguno de ustedes asesora una empresa brasileña le va a tener que decir guarda con este ingreso bruto porque tiene estos problemas, el efecto cascada y además las distintas tasas que tiene el impuesto. Ahí lo dejo a Eduardo para lo que sigue, que son las propuestas, ¿no?
Well, thank you, Lucas, very much for your very clear explanation on the Argentinian system. I will briefly, due to the time restraints, I will just briefly comment our proposals. Currently, I would say currently, but historically, but Brazil is always discussing the unification of its consumption tax into a single VAT. This started since the Constitution was enacted in '88, and we are still discussing this. And such tax reform at the constitutional level is never approved because for 2 reasons. The state and the municipalities, they are always very concerned with the possibility of losing their tax autonomy, and currently they have a lot of tax autonomy. And the second reason is that although the taxpayers, they do rate, they don't like our tax system, they are always afraid that a tax reform would increase the current taxes. So now we don't like the system, but we know how and how much we must pay. After reform, maybe the taxes will be even higher. We have discussed the implementation of a digital service taxes, but this is really unlikely to be approved now. And here just a brief comment on the political and legal obstacles for our tax reform. As I mentioned, we have several tax benefits in Brazil, and there's also the concern that these benefits will be eliminated. We have also discussions regarding the elimination of simplified regimes for medium-sized taxpayers, and this could really enlarge our compliance for medium taxpayers. The current proposals, they do discuss a single rate for any and all sorts of consumptions, and this may lead to more regressivity. We do have the federation problem, the risk of tax increase that I've just mentioned. Another great problem is that the average burden regarding service providers would be clearly higher after the tax reform, and the service sector is really important in Brazil today. And also several concerns on how this transition will go, which will be the costs, and how would the taxpayers in the middle of such economic rise be invited and obliged to comply with a totally new system. So just a few concluding remarks here, comparing Argentina to Brazil. As you can see, the tax burden is quite similar, but Brazil today is a little bit higher. Both are higher than the Latin America average. In what comes to human development, however, Argentina is a more developed country, so it seems that they are paying taxes for more returns, more rewards from the state. The consumption tax burden is quite similar in both states in terms of total GDP. The federal structure a little bit different because we have such municipality particularity in Brazil and thousands of municipalities. In Argentina, you do not have that, although you have certain municipalities. They do not have such autonomy as a federative entity. Currently, products and manufacturing are really overtaxed in Brazil. It seems to be more neutral in Argentina, despite of the gross revenue problems. And finally, here in Brazil, the VAT, the indirect taxes are charged by all federal entities. In Argentina, we have such a unified VAT, but gross income taxation, as Lucas just mentioned. None of the countries have established a digital service tax up to now. In terms of times to prepare and pay taxes, the total compliance burden due to such research of the World Bank, which is quite controversial. Brazil demands much more time of its taxpayer, which is not surprising for us. And in what comes finally to the rates for basic items, in theory in Brazil, we do have reduced rates, but most of the basic supplies are actually quite taxed, such as energy and telecommunications. And in Argentina, as Lucas mentioned, there's a general reduced rate for basic supplies and a refund system for vulnerable persons. We are these days discussing whether Brazil should implement such same system of a refund in our new VAT. So thank you very much. We end this panel and now pass on the word for the chairs.
Great, thank you, Eduardo. Thank you, Lucas, very much. I think you covered it all. I think we are a bit out of time. Don't know, Martin, if you would like to say some comments to the end, I think would be better so that we can listen now to Steven and Ariane. What do you think?
Yes, I agree with you.
Okay, great. Sorry?
Let's listen to Esteban and Ariane, and it will be better to have questions at the end.
Okay, perfect. So which one of you will speak first?
I will start. I will share my screen with you.
Great, thank you, Ariane. Go ahead, please.
Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes, perfect.
Nice. So hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you to the organizers that have made this great event, and also thanks to our audience. I will start talking about some post-pandemic measures in Brazil. As you probably know, Brazilian government has proposed a comprehensive tax reform, which was announced in December 2019. The first phase is related to the consumption taxes and our new federal VAT, as mentioned before by Eduardo. And the second phase refers to changes on corporate income tax system. I'll present you a quick overview of the main aspects about the second phase, otherwise we'll be here the whole night. We have some bills related to this topic pending of voting in the Congress. The last one was released 2 or 3 days ago. So it's really recent, it's really a hot topic now, and it has been highly debated in Brazil. So the main idea of the second phase is the reduction of the tax burden for companies. Here in Brazil, we have the corporate income tax, and we also have the social contribution on the net profits. Both together represent 34% of the income of a company. As you can see from the map here, our tax rate is above the world average, and these have been deeply criticized for years, considering that the taxation on consumption is quite heavy too, as Eduardo mentioned. The new proposal intends to reduce the tax rates of both taxes, so together they would be 24% in 2022 next year, and 21.5% from 2023 on. So it would be much closer the OECD members average and also the world average, as we can see by the picture here. And this is the main goal of this proposal, to have a comparable tax rate. Regarding dividends, in Brazil, dividends are exempt from tax for residents and also for non-resident shareholders, which is a really good advantage when you're talking about tax planning. This exemption scenario is not common, as you can see here. For example, in Europe, we have withholding tax for dividends. The bill presented to the Congress proposed withholding tax on dividends from 20% and from 20% to 30%, but avoiding such tax between subsidiaries and parent companies in Brazil. One point of discussion here is that those tax rates, the 20 to 30, are still high for foreign investors. Consider our limited tax treaty network. Today we have less than 40 double tax treaties, so the network's really limited, and the imposition of the withholding tax at 20 or 30% can be harmful to our economy. Brazilian law also provides interest on net equity. It is another manner provided by domestic legislation to distribute profits of a company to its shareholders, which is very close to dividends, so it's really similar. Although this distribution is taxed at the tax rate of 15%, or it can be 25% if the shareholder is a resident in a country considered as a tax haven, unlike dividends that are tax exempt, as I mentioned before. The advantage is the deduction of such interests. So about this deduction today, Brazilian law provides a limitation. The company is not free to deduct the whole amount that is paid to the shareholders. And so there is a calculation based on a Brazilian long-term interest rate that determines the maximum that can be deducted. And this tax reform intends not to allow this deduction anymore, which has not let the companies happy, as you can imagine. And these have been a really hot topic here.
So the idea is to share our experience. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you for the audience. In Argentina, we, as Martin mentioned at the beginning, there was a recent enactment of a law that replaced the 30% fixed rate with a progressive tax rate that, according to the accumulated net profit of the company, will give us a corporate tax rate of 25%, 30%, and 35%. And if we add the 7% withholding on the tax on dividends, we will have effective tax rates of 30.25% in the first layer, 34.90 in the second layer, and almost 40%, that is to say 39.55% in the last layer. And you have to bear in mind that the brackets and the thresholds are really low. If you have a company that has an accumulated net profit of more than 50 million Argentinian pesos, if we take 2 zeros, that will be the official exchange rate in US dollars. We will have a corporate tax rate of 35% and then a 7% withholding tax on dividends. So if we go to the next slide, we can see that we had a tax reform early 2018, and the idea was to get a progressive reduction of the corporate tax and dividend tax. We didn't have a tax on dividends before this law. Actually, we had an equalization tax, but the corporate tax rate was 30% this year, and we were expecting to get 25% next year, but our colleagues from the Congress changed our plans, and now the tax rate will be progressive, and we will keep the 7% withholding tax rate on dividends. And so the tax treaty we have with Brazil is not relevant regarding the limitation on withholdings on dividends, because the lower rate we can get is 10%, and since our domestic legislation provides for a 7%, the treaty is not applicable. And so if we go to the next slide, we can discuss and share our experience regarding the taxes that have been issued during the pandemic. The first one is the solidarity and extraordinary contribution. There's a lot to say regarding this tax. That is the tax on the rich people that levies the assets, the estimated net worth as of December 2020. And the threshold is not that high. It's just $2.1 million according to the official exchange rate at that time. And there are lots of problems with the tax. Of course, there are thousands of taxpayers, including our friend Carlos Tevez, that is challenging this tax at court. We expect to have a test, a constitutional test of our court, and basically what we can say of this tax is that the holders of the assets should value the assets according to the tax on the personal asset tax, and regardless of the treatment they had in the tax. So if there's no exemption of tax, Argentinian companies or the holdings of Argentinian companies are included in this tax. So basically what I can say, there's a lot of complaints regarding the constitutionality of this tax, because we have a rate that goes from 2 till 5.25%, and if we add that tax rate to the personal asset tax, we can get 7.5% on the net worth of an individual or a foreign resident, and that's a lot. So basically the challenges go with this constitutional test regarding if this tax absorbs in a given case a substantial part of the goods or the income of that individual or taxpayer. Another alternative, another challenge is, well, is that person that needs to pay or had to pay the tax because the due date was April this year, is still in possession of that assets, or the pandemic changed his situation. Also, this tax is challenged because of a double taxation. We are, I mean, the tax levy is the same person, the same fiscal period, the same taxable base as of the personal asset tax. There's also a violation of the equality guarantee, by which there are discriminations between where the asset is located, either in Argentina or abroad, or if it, or the resident country of an individual in a non-cooperative or low tax jurisdiction. Well, this is in an emergency situation. In Argentina, we were in emergency, and so we are on emergency again. And we have to bear in mind that Argentina had increased, as Martin mentioned, the wealth tax regarding assets located abroad, and well, there are lots of problems regarding the destination of or the destination of the collection of this tax. Only 20% is directed to mitigate the effects of the pandemic. The rest is allocated to solve structural problems of Argentina, such as 25% is for exploration of natural gas exploration. So as I mentioned before, there are no exemption of public debt bonds whatsoever. Contribution to irrevocable trust are not considered, and the residency is fixed as of the date of December of 2019, and so there's changes in residency. There are treaties that provide that supersede domestic legislation that are overridden by this domestic law. So there are lots of complaints regarding this new contribution that we assume it is a tax and not a contribution. And our court has said, our Supreme Court of Justice said in the past regarding an estate tax, that a tax is confiscatory and unconstitutional when it absorbs 1/3 of the assets, and that is to say the 33% of the effective rate. So, well, there are lots of taxpayers that are complaining and that initiated court cases. Others are with tax audit, and we expect to have a constitutional test in the short term. And also we had this repro for companies with negative interannual turnover variation. We have also emergency assistance for employees, and I think that as you had in Brazil, there were deferral and forgiveness of local taxes and specific incentives for affected sectors. So if we go to the next slide, well, the idea is to discuss a little bit the tax treaty between Argentina and Brazil. And the protocol, you know that we had a treaty that was signed in the 80s, and the protocol was signed in 2018. And even if Argentina signed the MLI, in that signature, Argentina said that the MLI was not to be considered regarding the treaty with Brazil, and the reason is because they were negotiating this protocol, and so they included provisions according to BEPS, specifically the LOB clause and PTT clause. And well, the idea today is to discuss the technical assistance services issue. So Ariane, go ahead.
Yeah. Just like Stemma mentioned, our topic of discussion today will be the taxation of technical services. Here we have the Article 12. Generally, according to the OECD model, this article allocates exclusively tax writings to the recipient's resident state. However, Brazil-Argentina Tax Treaty, among others, attributes tax rights to both contract states, as we can see here in the item 2. The amending protocol included a provision in the sense that Article 12 also applies to remuneration arising from technical assistance and technical services. This provision has raised numerous disputes here in Brazil, at least, between taxpayers and tax authorities in Brazil. This distinction of technical services and ordinary services in our legislation, our domestic legislation, is not that clear, which leads us to some concerns about application of Article 12 or Article 7 of the tax treaty that refers to business profits, or even Article 14 that refers to income from independent personal services. The main argument of the taxpayers here is that the extended concept of royalties only reaches technical services that are auxiliary, complementary, or instrumental to know-how or technology transfer agreement. So the protocol should be interpreted only in the context of royalty provision. And our Superior Court of Justice recently analyzed a case involving Brazil-Spain tax treaty, which also has this provision that equates technical services to royalties. It was decided that remittance for the payment of technical services or technical assistance with or without technology transfer will be under Article 7 or even Article 14, only if the protocol that equates those payments to royalties is not applicable. And the important thing here is that this decision was not issued under the system of multiple appeals that we have in our Civil Procedure Code. Then, although it's a really relevant decision because it was issued by the Superior Court, these understandings do not must be applied by the other courts in a mandatory way. It means that lower courts or even other panels of the Brazilian Superior Court can analyze the same topic, reaching a different result. And then we still have a unstable scenario about this topic. And now Esteban will tell us the Argentine standpoint about the technical services in the context of treaty.
So we don't have a definition. I mean, even if it's stated in our statutory income tax law, we don't have a definition. We have definitions in the treaties, such as the one we have in the protocol with Brazil, and that definition is kind of broad, and I don't know if there's you can go to the next slide.
Sure.
So what we wanted to discuss also is that, well, this is a court case prior to the protocol by which the discussion was, is there a source in Argentina or not? And it was about an intermediation in Brazil that was buying on behalf of the Argentinian company. And so the court said, well, there's no source in Argentina because there's no technical service, there's no transfer of knowledge. And so we don't care about the treaty because there's no source in Argentina, and so Brazil can levy that freely without the application of a treaty. So the idea is, well, first we need to revise if there's a source into Argentina or Brazil, then we apply the treaty and see which has a taxing right. And what is interesting in the new definition of technical services is that there is an inclusion of platform of technologies, and so it's very important to see whether there's an actual transfer of knowledge or not for purposes of qualifying as a technical services and for purposes of allocating a source of income to Argentina. And so when we were discussing this morning with Ariane regarding what would be a common practice regarding a technical service and complementary services to that technical services, probably the joint conclusion would be, well, you would rather separate them, allocate value to the technical service itself and to the complementary service or the ancillary service for purposes of getting different tax treatment, 15 for one and 0 for the other, at least in Argentina, and I think that Brazil will provide the same conclusion. So, well, this is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you a lot. Martin, I think I've spoken a lot, so in the beginning. So if you can start now, and then I just ask a few questions. I don't know. It's okay for you?
Thank you very much. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Congratulations for all the speakers. They were they were great. Congratulations to all. It's very interesting, all the topics that have been commented tonight. It's difficult to start selecting one, but I will begin talking about the reduction of rates, our experience in Argentina, the reduction in the corporate tax rate. It was a good idea. The problem we have is that the economy didn't accompany the proposal. There was a huge crisis, and it seems to happen that revenue is never enough. So in Argentina, that proposal was abandoned, as we all said. I would like to ask our Brazilian colleagues, what do you think about the evolution of that proposal? Do you think that the revenue will be enough for the public services that the state wants to render to the people? Are there any projects about the economical effects of the reduction of that tax rate? What is the sense in general on the professionals that are specialists in this area?
Ariane would like me to start, and then you add something?
Yeah, it can be, sure.
Okay, so, well, first of all, I have to also to compliment you guys, Esteban and Ariane, very clear presentations about very interesting topics. And I think this is the main issue we're discussing here in Brazil right now. So I think the question is, we formulate to you because I think you are ahead of us in this aspect. I mean, what happened in Argentina afterwards? Because, I mean, the sensation we get is that it will happen something like happened to you. I mean, people are promising to lower corporate income tax and tax dividends. But I think in the end, what will happen is that we'll have taxation on dividends, yeah, and our corporate tax will still be high, especially because what Ariane said. Companies here in Brazil, they deduct these notional interests. So instead of getting a loan from a bank, yeah, it can pay to their partner, to their investors, yeah, an interest, and can deduct that up to 50% of the profit. So when you look at the rate, it's 34%, but the base can be cut to half. So actually, this is an interesting methodology, and that was what I was discussing in this meeting we had with tax authorities before we start, that we are saying, well, we hear they saying that this system doesn't exist in anywhere, but it's exactly what Europe is looking and trying to introduce. Just in June this year, Europe Commission was worried about the company's debts because, of course, everyone in times of pandemic, they had to go and get credit. So, of course, the companies are in debt, yeah. But if the companies are going to this debt, how can you stimulate investors in keeping their capital on the companies, on the enterprises? Because, I mean, if they go to banks or if they loan to companies, they will get the deduction benefit and they'll get a rate that is 15% withholding tax on the interest. Whereas if they keep it on the capital of companies, they will receive nothing. So these notional interests, these equity interests, Ariane was talking, they are fundamental to our system. This together combined with people are saying, oh, you don't tax dividends. It's not true that we don't tax dividends. The thing is, we do like you guys. We concentrate taxation on companies. So we have a high taxation on companies, right? But we do that, and I think it's a very simple rule, as you had probably in Argentina. So you would concentrate. It's easy for tax authorities to make audits because they only have to audit the company, not the investor. So I think we have many advantages on our system. It works. It's simple. And as you said, as you saw, Brazilian taxpayers take 5 times what Argentinian taxpayers take in times of compliance, time in compliance. You spend like 300 hours. We had like 1,500 hours. So we have it's not a 7-to-1, but it's a 5-to-1, right? So you guys are much simpler than we are. So I think we're complicating things here. And I would like to know, because what we are seeing now is that United States did reduce corporate tax during Trump administration, but now they're just going on the other direction, right? They're raising tax on corporation. So my question to you guys, and of course, before that, I would like to hear Ariane, but is that, was it a success? I mean, this transformation, was it a big hit? I mean, should we dive into this pool or should we stay where we are? Ariane, please, if you could add something.
Sure, I totally agree with you, João. I guess the narrative is to reduce the tax burden for the companies, but I don't think this will be the real effect that we will have. The interest on net equity is really important, as you mentioned, and it would be really harmful, not only the taxation of dividends in a so high tax rate that we mentioned, 20% to 30%, but also the restriction for deduction for interest on net equity. So it would be really harmful for our company, for our business. And I'm also curious about hearing our colleagues, what happened in Argentina.
If you want, Martin, I will just jump in and say a comment regarding the first reform. If we had achieved this 25% corporate tax rate and then the 13 tax on dividends, that would be a success, or that would have been a success, but we didn't. I mean, the plan was, let's go 35, 30, 25, and when we are in 30, rules change. We have a progressive now corporate tax with a very low threshold. So most of the companies will be paying 35 income tax rate plus the 7% dividend. And as in Brazil, there's no dividend on subsidiaries in Brazil, or in this case in Argentina. So distributions among local entities is not taxed on dividends. And of course, you have to bear in mind the transitional period, because results that have been taxed with the prior tax rate and are distributed with a new rate, well, shall be taxed and shall be allocated to without the dividend or with the prior tax on dividend. And so maybe the transition is not that easy, but we were in the middle of our way. That's my opinion.
The main problem we have when the tax reform was going to enter into force was the economic situation. We have a lot of inflation in our country. The tax reform was conceived with a perspective of inflation not higher than 30% by year. Okay? It was at the end of 2017. When the first fiscal year was going to end, it was at the end of 2018, 1 year, the inflation accumulated was more than 40%. Okay, so that led into a new amendment that I mentioned as law 27,468. So an unstable economic background was a big enemy for a success in this tax reform. As you know, our national currency is not stable. We are suffering from inflation continuously and repeatedly. Now the inflation seems to be lowering, but well, it can change. So a good economic background is the key for success in a good implementation of a reduce of tax of the tax rate in the income tax law. Another thing that was expected in that tax reform was influence of investors to our country. Okay, but we are still waiting for that.
A raise of taxes, they normally don't invite people to invest in your country. Yeah, that's we're afraid in Brazil too.
Investors go where they are.
Sorry, Martin. Later.
I didn't hear you, Eduardo. Excuse me.
Oh, I would just say a funny thing is that the government intends to tax dividend, and in theory, they say that there will be no raise of taxes because you would lower the base for companies, the rates for company. But they already know what they would do with the additional source of revenue that derived from the dividend distribution. So there's no sincerity in the discuss of the government. There will be additional source of revenue, so there will be raise of taxes.
When our income tax law was reformed in 2018, something related to dividends was well treated. It was a presumption of distribution of dividends or results. Okay, it was to avoid the ficto distribution when a company makes a loan to the shareholder. Okay, it was a good idea. I don't know if you in Brazil are thinking about that. There was some situations that are presumed as distribution of dividends, loans, sales of goods at a lower or higher price, any kind of money taken from the company, salaries paid more than the average remuneration of people that make the same job. Okay, so this is something that was good in that reform. It was not well received by the taxpayers, but it was an intelligent idea.
Yeah, I think, I mean, considering the time, I think we can make less. I mean, I don't know if the internet has some questions, but I would like to make one question to Eduardo and to Lucas, yeah, because one major issue, I mean, one major critic of our system is that it's too regressive, right? Because we tax a lot, of course, consumption, and as poor people, they consume always everything that they gain, right? So you basically have heavy taxation on poor people. And one of the measures we're discussing seems to be in the direction of what Lucas said about these tax refunds for poor people. I don't know what Eduardo thinks of that, if it's a good or an interesting measure, because that's something we're discussing now on our tax reform, considering consumption taxes. I think it's an interesting topic, but I would like to hear from you, though, that you have this experience, and afterwards, if Eduardo could add something to say what is his opinion. Okay, please. Thank you.
la experiencia que tenemos es muy buena, los datos, de hecho, esta es una medida que arrancó por un tiempo, en línea con lo que dice Martín, es un país en donde estamos en emergencia hace mucho tiempo, hay mucha inflación. Y esta fue una medida que en números, yo por ahí no quería abrumarlos con números, pero los números que se vieron para continuar con esta medida, esta es una medida que arrancó en fines de 2019, con digamos, la misma ley de impuesto país, que yo les comenté, tenía un artículo sobre este tema, y la verdad es que es una muy buena medida. Personalmente, yo hablo acá por mí, no en representación del organismo fiscal, ¿no? Pero es una muy buena medida para reducir esto que decía Joao, la regresividad de nuestro sistema. Lo último que quería agregar, y lo dejo a Eduardo, a mí me impactó un último artículo que leí de alguien que ustedes deben conocer muy bien, que es Rita de la Feria, que digamos que yo la he leído mucho para entender la reforma brasileña. Ella publica un artículo, lo tengo anotado porque me llamó la atención, Public Perception of Indirect Taxes, y ahí lo que ella dice es, la experiencia europea e incluso de Irlanda es reducir la tasa del IVA no beneficia indirectamente a los sectores de menos recursos, que es lo que vos... Me sorprendió porque la mayoría de la doctrina dice lo contrario, ¿no? Diría, reducimos... Bueno, sí, porque lo que ella fundamenta es que eso funciona en un mercado perfecto. Y generalmente... No, un mercado no es perfecto. Ella lo que decía es que la experiencia en Irlanda era, se había bajado el IVA, y lo que ella decía es, se bajó, pero la diferencia era más ganancia para el, digamos, para el vendedor, y eso no se trasladaba a precio. Esto también en un mercado perfecto, por algo que dice Martín, digamos, en un mercado con mucha inflación, es difícil que algo funcione, sinceramente, digamos, tanto el tema de dividendos como esto es difícil, pero a mí personalmente me encanta la medida, y me encantaba la devolución también, porque nosotros tenemos casi 50% de informalidad, y fomentar los medios electrónicos de esta manera, incluso una empresa que tiene mucho en Brasil ahora, que es Mercado Libre, también fomentar medios electrónicos es una buena manera de dar inclusión financiera, y creo que Argentina está avanzando en esa idea. Hay algunas cuestiones, acabamos de modificar...
Disculpa, Lucas, disculpa te interrumpir, pero ¿cómo funciona? Porque la mayoría de nosotros creo que no sabemos cómo funciona exactamente ¿se podría explicar más o menos?
Sí,
Lo simplificado.
La devolución.
Sí.
Sí, esto funciona de la siguiente manera. Nosotros tenemos una serie de programas de ayuda que uno se llama Asignación Universal por Hijo, y también esto va para jubilados que cobran muy poca, la jubilación mínima. Entonces, y también unos beneficiarios, otra, a mi entender, buena medida, que es la tarjeta alimentar. Es una tarjeta donde solo se puede comprar alimentos. Ha habido alguna gente que ha querido usarlo para fines no santos, pero a través de eso, con la tarjeta de débito, la debit card, o esta tarjeta alimentar, automáticamente, cuando yo hago la compra, me acreditan al mes siguiente la devolución del impuesto que yo pago. Así funciona básicamente. Esto es en función de un padrón que tiene el ANSES, que sería quien regula esto junto con la Administración Federal de Ingresos Públicos, tiene un padrón de personas que deberían estar incluidos y automáticamente se hace la devolución. Y ha funcionado bien. La verdad que los datos dieron muy bien y por eso hace menos de un mes se prorrogó hasta fin de año. Perdón, Eduardo, que te saqué tiempo.
Great. What I think, João, is that the source of measure is great, because the problem with indirect taxation is that it's so much impersonal. So you don't know how much of the income of the person is being paid when it consumes. So with the system, you can make the tax on consumption a little bit more personal. So if you are a low income family and you consume, you have like a cashback system for the taxes paid. We do have problems with the implementation of this in Brazil, because for this to be perfect, you have to know that the supplier has paid the taxes to the government, and then this amount will be credited in the card of the beneficiary. And here in our current VAT system, this can be complicated because the credits are not linked to the actual payment, and you still do not have a link between the payment and such credit system. We could develop both things, but in theory, I believe it's nice. But I wouldn't say that this is the only measure. As Lucas said in its presentation, Argentina do keep low rates for certain basic supplies and also added this system. So I believe that both measures are great. In Brazil nowadays, we're discussing establishing a fixed and high rate for all supplies, that it has its problems. So the Argentinian system seems nice, a nice example for Brazil.
Yeah, I also think that, sorry to interrupt, Martin, please go ahead.
No, it's very simple. It's a good example of how technology can reduce the regressivity in those indirect taxes. Yeah. Because all the chain is trackable. You can, if the rebate or the cash, if the cash is perceived in the bank, you can go backwards and you can see as a tax administrator if the retailer has paid the tax or not, if the provider of the retailer has paid the tax or not. So that measures to formalize all the economy is also a good idea for the tax administration and also for the economy, because if all the payments are made by bank institution or by digital banks, it's very good for the country because the revenue is supposed to be higher, and also it facilitates the work of the tax administrator and also the tax professionals, tax practitioners that are we. Okay, so the experience is good. The problem that we have is that a cashback was abandoned, except for what Luca mentioned, and well, the cashback was limited by a fixed amount, which was reduced in comparison with the expenditure of a family. Okay, and it was very precise what Eduardo said. It's difficult in indirect taxation to correct that regressivity because you don't know personal situations of each consumer, of each taxpayer. It's not an expenditure tax that Nicolas Caldor proposed. So I think that here technology has a lot to help.
Yeah, it's my opinion too. I think it's, I mean, at least in theory, a good idea, but I also agree with Eduardo. It cannot be replaced. I mean, you cannot just heavily tax food or heavily tax, you know, all the basic items, yeah, because you compensate with these tax refund. I think they have different achievements and they're different goals, right? So one is like tax fairness in general, because I think when you buy food, I mean, you cannot have a heavy tax on food. That's absurd. I mean, in general, whether it's rich people or a rich person or a poor person buying food, yeah. But I do agree that it can help regressivity. My only thought here is that I don't know if it works in Argentina, is if you have like a fixed limit. I mean, I don't know, a person that has, you know, an income of $1,000, let's say. I mean, it's much lower than that, but just for an example, if you receive less than $1,000, you have the right. But if you receive $1 just after this threshold, I mean, you go back to the system. So I think you should perhaps work on that limit, so that you can have, like, as you have progressivity in income tax, perhaps you have to work on regressivity, so that the person goes to the system in a soft way, and not just $1 or $1 or $1 after is the total disaster. Okay, but I mean, great to hear you guys and to know that it works. I think I prefer this system to the taxation and dividends. I think my personal opinion would stick to that and abandon that other, because I don't know, I don't feel very happy also with the results in Argentina. But guys, I think we are running out of time. I don't know, Eduardo, if you have some questions in the internet. You are the guy of the internet. I cannot control thousands of.
No, just a few comments here about the reduce of tax in Argentina from Ignacio Abanu. We had another comment from Diego saying that ingresos brutos es lo que le quedó a la provincia después que la nación robara toda la fuente de recursos. No está feliz con la situación. But I think we covered it all. Just thank everyone for its participation, and it was a really nice event today. And thank both IFA Argentina, Brazil, and Central IFA for all the support. Thank you very much.
Esteban, Lucas, Martin, any final words, please?
Lucas, Esteban.
Thank you very much for the space. It was a pleasure. Thank you for the organizers, and of course to the audience. Thank you, Ariane, for the patience also.
Thank you for all. Thank you, João, Martin, Eduardo. It's a good work with the presentation, and it's a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank you again for hosting us here, for all the work done on the other side of the background. We're very happy of being here with you. We're very glad of being part of this bilateral event. I'd like to thank on behalf of our IFA branch for all the people that are participating on the virtual room. And I'd also like to thank all of you, because I think the team was great. We discussed about a lot of topics. I know more now about the Brazilian taxation system than I knew before. We have done some mistakes before than the Brazilian fiscal regulations, so it was very interesting about having the possibility to comment you some experiences. And thank you for all of you for the opportunity of being here. Thank you very much.
Okay, so guys, thank you a lot, all of you participants and all our audience that have been watching us till this moment. I think it was very nice to share experiences with you. I think that unlike in football or in soccer, here we can have both win and win situation. And it was really, really a pleasure to be here with you tonight. Okay, thank you everyone. Goodbye. And I think this is just the first of a series of events we will promote together. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.